had become self-supporting as a writer. Not high on the hog self-supporting, but self-supporting. And I was selling a mystery novel a year to Random House. So at that time, 60, 61, the received wisdom was, and in publishing as in most places, if it weren't for received wisdom, there wouldn't be any wisdom at all. The received wisdom then was that women bought hardcover books and men bought paperbacks. So, okay, I have a hardcover publisher and I'm doing a book a year with them, but I'm writing more than that, and I want to write more than that. So I thought it'd be interesting to do another name and another kind of thing and do it as paperback original. So then I'd have two strings to my bow. So this is now supposed to be a book for men. So what do we do with this? All fiction starts with language. What kind of language do you use? It starts with the language and then goes to the story and then goes to the people. So I said, I want the language to be very stripped down and bleak and no adverbs, and just, so I want it stark. All right, I'm going to call him, the name is going to be Stark, just to remind me what we're doing here. The Richard was for Richard Widmark, and well, that was, you know, a hero of mine. So I sat down and wrote a book about a guy who walks into New York across the George Washington Bridge, creates his own ID, and just claws a little space for himself in the city. So I can look back at it and say, that's what I was doing. I was doing autobiography. I was doing, you didn't invite me to the party, but I'm not leaving. If I'd known that's what I was doing, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But I could look back and say, that's where that's from. I still believe then that at the end of a story, the good guy is supposed to win and the bad guy is supposed to lose. So at the end of the thing, I had Parker caught, arrested by the police. And my agent sent it to Gold Medal, which was the best outfit then, and they said no, they sent it back. So then he sent it to Pocketbooks. And at that time there was an editor at Pocketbooks, who I didn't yet know, with the wonderful name of Buckland Moon. And he called me and he said, I like this book, and I like this character. Is there any way that the character could get away at the end and you give me 3 books a year about him? And I said, I think so. And I did for 2 years. I did 3 books a year for 2 years, and then it sort of tapered off. But there was something so liberating in knowing. And so after that, I thought, I did not put any reader-friendly stuff with this guy. You know, he doesn't have any warm, soft parts. He doesn't have a puppy. You know, there's no redeeming social quality in this guy at all. But that's what Buck seemed to like. If I'd known I was going to write book after book about him, there are 2 things I would have done differently about his name. I would have given him a first name, which I never did, and eventually became too late. And I probably wouldn't have called him Parker, because I've had almost 30 books of trying to figure out other ways to say Parker parked the car. The amazing thing was that from that standing start, 62, by the middle 60s, they were selling very well and selling overseas more than Westlake was, and making more money overseas more than Westlake was, and starting to sell to the movies before Westlake was. Stark was doing better than me, and I was beginning to get a little irritated by this guy. Get out of here. You're my creation. Right, I've done all these books about this guy, and he's a professional criminal, and he's been beating the odds for far too long, Before the first book, he was in jail, but he has never been in jail since the book started. Let's see what happens if I put him in jail. So in a book called Breakout, by the end of part 1, he's in jail, which he hated, and so did I. So by the end of part 2, he's out of jail. But that got us both irritated enough to get really moving again. And then then I did one more that had to somehow accommodate the world as it is since 9/11, because the world as it is since 9/11 is so much more security conscious and has so many more little checkpoint Charlies every day as you go through your life. You know, how does a guy like this operate in this world? So, you know, let's put Parker and a few friends over here in an armored car over there and see what happens. And so it was interesting to see them having to deal with all this stuff, and that kept it going. By the end of the book, he's on foot and he's going up a hill, and there's cops and dogs behind him. You know, so even the writer says, you know, it starts with technology, but it still ends with dogs. And I called it Nobody Runs Forever. And so many people said, oh, does that mean it's the end of the series? I said, no, it doesn't mean it's the end of the series. So obviously I had to do another one that started 1 second after that one. And that one I had so much trouble with. Then I'm a little snake bit at the moment. I got a little wait a while. And okay, again, it wasn't until I finished it that I looked back and I saw why I was having trouble. Because he goes up the hill and he meets a guy who's hunting rabbits up there, and then he goes off with that guy. And the book is him trying to get back into his life, his world, get back with Claire, get back into what he is. It is the only book in the series in which he is the only one present who is or was or ever will be in a criminal enterprise. He's completely surrounded by civilians. And he's not quite sure how to deal with them, and they're not quite sure how to deal with him. And so there's all this kind of, everybody knows this is a strange dog, and it made for a very slow book. The first movie from a book of mine was from another Richard Stark. It was in 1966. It was 1 year before Point Blank. And it was done by Jean-Luc Godard. And it was called Made in USA. On 12 afternoons, they shot a movie that he wrote from the Jugger with Anna Karenina, because Parker then became a girl reporter. Then immediately there was Point Blank with Lee Marvin, and then there was the split with Jim Brown, at which point a friend of mine said, so far Parker's been played by a white man, a black man, and a woman. I think the character lacks definition. So the movie of the outfit was shot fast with Robert Duvall as perhaps the closest to Parker. I mean, what Lee Marvin did was a wonderful destroyed Lee Marvin. But what Robert Duvall did was a wonderful terse, taciturn Parker. He just did a nice job, and Joe Don Baker is his more outspoken partner, foil. But they just did it very fast. They wrote it, shot it, got it over with, didn't fool around. Brian Helgeland, he first wrote to me saying he wanted to do this from the book. Then we had some correspondence back and forth, you know, but he had his vision, he knew what he was going to do. And then he sent me I think there were 2 or 3 versions that he did. He sent me one of them. There's a lot about it I liked. And there was a lot of a level of hardness and coldness that I thought was appropriate and I thought was right. Brian was being too deferential to me. A thing that, you know, judging from my wife, is something you get over very quickly.